cafe buzzed with the rhythmic whirring of machines and the urgent voices of baristas calling out drink orders, mixing with the tapping heels of customers anxious to get on with their day. Tucked away in a quiet corner near the window, Vincent Hayes sat alone, stirring a lukewarm cup of coffee. The liquid swirled slowly, as if he were searching for answers beneath its thin layer of foam. On the surface, Vincent was the picture of success. A man who had rescued a dying coffee chain 10 years ago and turned it into a thriving franchise with 15 locations across the region. But beneath that polished exterior, something wasn't sitting right. Sales were steady. Regional managers continued to file reports that painted a picture of control and efficiency, but Vincent wasn't the kind of leader who placed blind faith in spreadsheets. He knew better. The truth lived in the fine print, in the rising number of customer complaints, in the quiet exodus of employees who left without explanation. Numbers could be manipulated, dressed up, but the human gut instinct that never lied. And Vincent's instincts were screaming. He needed to see for himself. Dressed in a worn-out hoodie, thick-rimmed glasses, and a scruffy, deliberately unkempt beard, Vincent looked nothing like the polished CEO whose face appeared in business journals and boardroom presentations. That was exactly the point. Anonymity was his advantage. He had chosen this particular location for a reason. The highest turnover rate across the entire franchise. Most employees didn't last longer than 6 months. Something was deeply wrong here, and he was about to uncover it. The moment he approached the counter, he could feel it, the tension in the air, tight like a wire strung too taut. The cashier, a young woman with weary eyes and a forced smile, looked like someone who had practiced being pleasant out of pure necessity. Her name tag read Lee. "Good morning," she said with a soft, almost rushed tone. "What can I get you?" Vincent ordered a simple black coffee and stepped aside, pretending to scroll through his phone like any other customer. But just seconds later, a scene unfolded that made his stomach turn. The store manager, Rick, a broad-shouldered man nearing 50, was standing like a wall beside the espresso machine. But he wasn't just present, he was looming, dominating the space. A young barista, no older than 20, fumbled nervously with the milk steamer, his hands visibly shaking. "What the hell is wrong with you, James?" Rick's voice sliced through the ambient noise of the cafe. "You've been here 3 weeks and you still can't make a goddamn latte." "I'm trying, sir," James replied, voice barely above a whisper. Rick let out a mocking laugh, sharp and cold. "Try harder, or better yet, go find a job that matches that empty head of yours." Vincent's fingers tightened around the paper coffee cup until it crinkled. No one stepped in. The other employees kept their heads down, working faster, as if afraid to breathe too loudly. Lee flinched slightly, a reflex most likely developed through countless similar outbursts. Even the customers shifted in discomfort, glancing away but saying nothing. James finally managed to prepare the latte. Still trembling, he gently placed it on the counter. "Here you go." Rick took a sip, then immediately spat it out into the trash can. "Pathetic. Remake it." The humiliation was unmistakable. James said nothing, simply turned back to the machine, shoulders hunched, face pale. Vincent drew in a long, steady breath, forcing himself to stay in character. He couldn't afford to reveal himself. Not yet. Instead, he took a seat at a table near the counter, eyes quietly following every movement. Rick stormed through the cafe like a storm cloud, barking orders, nitpicking errors, snapping at anyone within arm's reach. When Lee miscounted a customer's change by a single dollar, Rick growled something harsh under his breath that made her cheeks flush. Another employee mistakenly placed a tray in the wrong spot and was immediately berated in front of 2 customers. There were no corrections, no guidance, no second chances, only public shaming and relentless pressure. 1 hour crawled by, each minute stretching like a rubber band on the verge of snapping. And during that time, Vincent understood something critical. Rick wasn't just a strict manager, he was a tyrant. He didn't coach, he crushed. He didn't build a team, he broke people down until they could barely function. And the worst part? No one pushed back. Because they couldn't. These workers needed their jobs. In this economy, stable work was a lifeline. And in an environment like this, where silence was safety, speaking up meant risking everything. Vincent had seen enough. This wasn't just a store with high turnover. This was a store drowning in fear. Fear had replaced culture, and that fear, that toxicity, was festering right in the heart of the brand he had built with such pride. They were surviving, but barely, and Vincent knew that survival like this wouldn't last much longer. He stood up, tossed his empty coffee cup into the trash, and let his eyes linger one more time on the people around him. Good people, clinging to hope in a place that was slowly erasing their spirit. He wasn't leaving, not yet. But Rick was about to discover exactly who he had been humiliating all this time. The next morning, before the sky had even begun to lighten, Vincent returned, this time dressed in a freshly pressed barista uniform. He had discreetly contacted the HR department the night before, pulling strings to ensure that an application from Vince was quietly processed and approved. No one at this location had the faintest clue that the newest hire was, in fact, the man who owned everything they stood on. From the moment he stepped inside, Vincent noticed the atmosphere. Exhaustion hung thick in the air, like steam. Lee stood behind the register, stifling a yawn while prepping the cash drawer. James lingered near the espresso machine, eyes dull, posture slouched, as if carrying invisible weights on his shoulders. The morning routine played out like a scene on loop, mechanical, silent, stripped of joy. Rick hadn't arrived yet, and without him the space was quiet, not peaceful, but less oppressive. Like the eye of a storm. Vincent took the chance. "I'm Vince," he said, casual and unassuming, "just getting the hang of things." Lee gave a small nod, offered a few quick instructions, her gaze drifting toward the entrance every so often, waiting for the storm to hit. And then, it did. The door flung open with force. Rick stepped in, bringing with him a kind of gravity that made the entire room seem to shrink. He didn't greet anyone, didn't make eye contact, didn't even offer a polite nod, just a cold command. "Bring me the morning sales report." A short while later, he returned with a cup of coffee in hand, likely brewed out of fear rather than courtesy. His eyes swept across the room, pausing briefly on Vincent. "You the new guy?" he asked, tone flat and disinterested. Vincent nodded. There was no handshake, no introduction. Rick simply pointed to the espresso machine. "Let's see if you're as useless as the rest of them." Vincent stepped forward. His old skills kicked in instinctively. With calm, practiced movements, he ground the beans, steamed the milk, and poured a flawless cappuccino in under a minute. Rick took a sip, expression unreadable as ever, then walked away without a word. Lee shook her head slightly and muttered, "That's about the closest thing to a compliment you'll get from him." Throughout the rest of the shift, Vincent watched carefully. Rick wasn't the only problem. The schedule was chaotic. Employees were being pushed to work double shifts without breaks. Lee sighed as she explained they were severely understaffed, but Rick refused to hire more help. "They just need to toughen up," he insisted. Vincent noticed the register frequently came up short, only by a few dollars at a time, not enough to raise alarms individually, but often enough to seem suspicious. Every time Lee checked the numbers, her hands would tense, her eyes darting across the mismatched figures. Then she'd quietly recount them, as if trying to protect herself from something far worse. By midday, a customer complained about a burnt pastry. Rick didn't handle it professionally. He lashed out at the head baker, a soft-spoken woman named Carla who trembled as he berated her. She looked on the verge of tears. Vincent couldn't stay silent any longer. He stepped in, remade the order himself, and handed it to the customer with a calm apology. The customer nodded in appreciation. Rick, however, seethed. "You don't fix their screw-ups," he growled. "You let them learn the hard way." And Vincent looked him straight in the eye and replied evenly, "Or you train them properly, so they don't make mistakes to begin with." Rick narrowed his eyes, but didn't respond. Instead, he retreated to his office. His silence in that moment was louder than any of his usual tirades. By the end of the day, Vincent had reached a sobering realization. This store was still functioning, but not because of Rick. In spite of him. Lee stayed late, hunched over the register for the third time that day, rubbing her temples as she tried to reconcile the numbers. James dragged a mop across the floor, too tired to lift his feet properly. Carla wiped down the counters, her expression hollow, as if she had nothing left to give. Vincent had come here to observe, but now he knew he had to act, and tomorrow Rick was going to learn the truth about who he'd been demeaning all along. The following morning, Vincent arrived even earlier than the day before. The scent of freshly roasted coffee beans filled the air, but beneath it was something heavier. The staleness of fatigue, of stress, soaked into every wall and every glance. He resumed his tasks like usual, brewing coffee, wiping counters, organizing supplies. He blended in, just another barista on another long shift. Lee was at the register, counting cash. Her fingers moved more quickly than usual. Vincent noticed a flicker of unease in her eyes as she looked at the numbers, then glanced toward the office door. A reflex born from too many close calls. Rick hadn't arrived yet. Vincent knew this was the moment to act. The night before, he had stayed up late reviewing the store's financial records. Numbers don't lie. The shortages were consistent, small but frequent, and they always pointed in one direction. He wasn't just dealing with a bad manager, he was dealing with a thief. When Rick finally walked through the door, the atmosphere shifted immediately. No one said anything, but everyone moved a little faster, more guarded. Rick said nothing, just stormed straight into his office and slammed the door shut. Vincent walked over to Lee, speaking low and careful. "Has the register always come up short?" Lee froze for a moment, her hand clenched tightly around a receipt. I don't know what you mean." Vincent didn't press her further. He held her gaze, seeing the fear, the resignation, and something deeper. A truth she wasn't able to say aloud. She knew, she just couldn't say it. And Vincent understood. This had gone far enough. It was time to do what was right, not just for the company, but for the people being slowly crushed under the weight of silence and control. Rick's voice suddenly tore through the air like a blade. "Lee, get in here, now." She flinched but moved quickly, heading to the office with the precision of someone trained by repeated trauma. Vincent remained at the counter, appearing calm, still wiping down the surface, but his ears were tuned in like a wire pulled taut. "Short again?" Rick asked, his voice low but threatening. "I counted 3 times," Lee responded, quiet but steady. "The numbers still don't add up." Rick let out a dramatic sigh, one meant to intimidate rather than express frustration. "Then maybe you need to start paying more attention. I can't afford mistakes like this. You understand?" "Yes, sir." Vincent clenched his jaw. That was it. He'd heard enough. Vincent's jaw clenched, every muscle in his face tightening. He had heard enough, and this time he wasn't going to stand on the sidelines. The next few hours dragged on in unbearable tension. Rick remained Rick, hovering constantly behind the staff, ready to erupt over even the smallest mistake. The oppressive atmosphere smothered every inch of the cafe. Lee avoided unnecessary conversation. James worked silently, eyes fixed downward. Carla barely spoke at all, moving through her shift like a shadow. The entire team was caught in a toxic loop, repeating day after day. By midday, Vincent made up his mind. He shoved aside any lingering doubt and walked straight into Rick's office, without knocking. Rick looked up from his ledger, irritation flashing across his face. "Lost, are you?" Vincent quietly shut the door behind him. "No, but you are." Rick squinted, confusion overtaking his expression. "What the hell are you talking about?" Vincent removed his glasses, smoothed back his hair, and stood tall. The transformation in his posture, in his presence, it was unmistakable. This was no longer the meek new hire, and Rick could feel it. Vincent met his eyes and said clearly, "You've been stealing from my company." Rick leaned back slightly, a reflexive reaction to the truth slamming through his ego. "You're out of your mind." Vincent didn't flinch. "Not an accusation, it's a fact." Rick fumbled for control. "I don't know what you think you found, but you should stop talking." Vincent cut him off. His voice was cold now, like steel. "I've been watching. I've seen how you create chaos, how you manipulate fears so no one dares question you. You erode trust, make your staff second-guess themselves every time the drawer comes up short. But I don't second-guess. I know exactly what's been happening." Rick's fingers began to tap nervously against the desk, a habit he likely didn't even notice. "You have no proof," he muttered. Vincent reached into his pocket and laid a folded document on the desk. "This is a full financial breakdown for the last 6 months. Every shortage occurred during your shifts, always when Lee was handling the cash under your supervision. Always in small amounts, just enough to avoid detection." Rick glanced at the paper, then back at Vincent. His eyes darted, searching for a way out. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I made," Vincent said, his voice quiet but firm, "was trusting you to run this place." Rick sprang to his feet in protest. "You can't just." "I can, and I already have." Vincent's interruption was final. "Security will be here soon to escort you out. You'll receive no severance, and if I find out you've done this at any other location, I'll see to it that charges are filed." Rick's face turned red, his anger boiling over, but he didn't say another word. He knew he had lost. Vincent opened the door. Outside, Lee and the rest of the staff stood frozen, as if time had stopped. Their eyes sparkled with disbelief. "Rick is no longer your manager," Vincent announced, his voice steady and firm. "Starting today, everything changes." For the first time since Vincent had walked into this store, the air felt lighter. No one said anything, but relief spread through the room like sunlight breaking after a long storm. Lee's eyes widened, unable to fully grasp what she'd just heard. James gave a small nod, holding back tears. Carla stood silently, her eyes misty, like someone seeing hope for the first time in ages. Vincent turned to Lee. He had seen her carrying the weight of this place in silence. "Come into the office for a moment," he said gently. She hesitated, then followed. Vincent pulled out a chair for her and leaned against the desk, arms crossed. There was no more pretense, no more disguise, just a company owner and the woman who had kept this store from collapsing. "I know Rick put you in an impossible position," he said with quiet empathy. "You don't have to carry that anymore." Lee looked down, then let out a long breath, as if letting go of months of tension. "Every time the register came up short, I thought I was the one who messed up. He made me believe it was my fault." Vincent nodded. That's exactly how he controlled people, planting just enough doubt to keep them silent. But you weren't the problem. You were the one holding it all together. He lifted her gaze, searching his face. When she saw no lie in his eyes, her shoulders began to relax. "I want you to take over as interim manager," Vincent said. "Full pay, full authority to make staffing decisions. If you want the role permanently, it's yours." "Me?" Lee whispered, barely believing it. "You've already been doing the job. You just never got the credit for it." She took a shaky breath, then nodded slowly. "I'll do it, but we need more staff. People are quitting because they're overworked." "Then start hiring, effective immediately." For the first time since Vincent had met her, Lee stood tall. Her eyes were steady, no longer dimmed by fear. "I won't let this place go back to the way it was." "I know," Vincent said. "I trust you." Lee stepped out of the office with a new posture. Stronger, more certain. Vincent followed, watching as the employees gathered around the counter, still adjusting to the idea that the nightmare might actually be over. James stood nearby, still visibly tired, but there was something different about him. A flicker of light in his expression, a breath of life. Vincent addressed the team. "Starting today, things are different. No more grueling shifts, no more intimidation. If something's wrong, talk to Lee. And if she needs backup, she'll come to me." His words echoed in the air, not as orders, but as a promise, a real leader's vow. The same people who had once looked down in fear now looked up with cautious hope. The next morning, as the cafe filled with the familiar buzz of orders and machines, Lee finally looked up and asked Vincent in a soft but sincere voice, "Will you be checking in regularly?" Vincent met her eyes, firm and warm. "This store isn't just numbers on a report to me, none of them are. That's going to change, starting now." Between them was a silence not filled with fear, but mutual understanding. James was the first to nod, then Carla, then the others. Lee stepped forward with a calm confidence that hadn't been there before, ready to lead. "We've got the lunch rush coming in soon. Let's do this right." There was no need for a rallying cry. The team moved into place quickly, with a new energy surging through them. The cloud of tension that had once hovered over every shift was gone. No more wary glances, no more tiptoeing around fear. What remained was determination, and something they hadn't felt in a long time: trust. Vincent stayed through the rush. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was part of the rhythm. He stepped in when needed, wiping counters, grabbing pastries, but for the most part, he let the team handle things. And the difference was undeniable. Lee handled a difficult customer with grace and firmness, something Rick had never managed. James moved with confidence, his hands steady, his motions precise. He was no longer afraid to be himself, and that changed everything. By mid-afternoon, Vincent knew he didn't need to stay any longer, not because everything was fixed, but because the right people were now in the right place, and this time it was going to stay that way. Before he left, he pulled Lee aside and spoke in a firm but quiet tone. "If anything happens, anything at all, you call me directly, no middle management, just me." Lee nodded, resolute. "I will." As Vincent stepped out into the breeze, the scent of coffee mixed with something new. Relief. Something had shifted inside him. A weight had lifted. He had once built this company with a dream, to create something better than the cold, corporate chains that treated people like replaceable parts. But somewhere along the way, buried beneath numbers, strategies, and growth charts, he had lost sight of what mattered most. Not anymore. This wasn't just about one store. It was about the whole system, and Vincent knew he had work to do. But he didn't go back to the office right away. For several days he quietly visited other locations. No announcements, no advance notice. Each visit was a reality check, not measured in data points, but in eye contact, in body language, in how freely people spoke. And what he saw confirmed a painful truth. Rick hadn't been an isolated case. Not every manager was abusive, but the signs were eerily familiar. Employees too nervous to speak, schedules stretched to the breaking point, customer complaints that never made it past the store level. The cracks in the foundation weren't new. They'd been spreading for a long time. At one store, when Vincent asked about shift lengths, a barista looked around nervously before answering. At another, a supervisor gave only a subtle glance toward the office before quietly admitting they were short-staffed. That hesitation didn't come from ignorance. It came from fear. Vincent didn't need more evidence. He needed a solution. Back at headquarters, he called an emergency meeting with the senior leadership team. The air was tense. They could feel this wasn't a routine check-in. Vincent placed a thick stack of documents on the table and let the silence sit before finally speaking. These past few days, I've visited multiple stores unannounced. What I found wasn't just disappointing, it was unacceptable. We have managers who treat employees like disposable parts. We have schedules that burn people out. And worst of all, we've created a culture of silence, where speaking up feels dangerous. That ends now. The head of operations shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie as he tried to maintain composure. We've been monitoring turnover rates, but in retail, that's not unusual. Vincent's gaze didn't flinch. There's a difference between natural turnover and people leaving because they're miserable, and we've been choosing not to see it. The room went quiet. Then the head of HR spoke up. "What do you propose?" Vincent leaned forward, his voice calm but unwavering. "First, we overhaul how we promote managers. No one steps into leadership without proper training, not just in operations, but in how to lead people. Second, we implement an anonymous employee feedback system. I will personally review every report every quarter. Third, every store will have a direct communication line to corporate. No more gatekeeping by regional management. If something's wrong, we're going to hear about it." Slowly, heads began to nod. Some people hesitated, but no one spoke against it. The VP of Finance let out a slow breath. "This is going to take time to roll out." "Then we start now," Vincent replied. No further objections came, and change began, swift and unapologetic. The entire network received word of the new policies. Some managers welcomed the clarity and accountability. Others resisted the added scrutiny. But those like Rick, who had long operated under the assumption that no one was paying attention, were removed quickly. Vincent continued his surprise visits, and gradually, he started seeing the difference. Employees no longer whispered. They spoke freely. Breaks that had once been skipped were now taken without guilt. At Lee's store, she had already hired 3 new team members, and operations were smoother than ever before. One afternoon, Vincent stepped into a location that had previously struggled with morale. What he saw was small but powerful. A barista laughing with a coworker while prepping drinks, her hands moving with ease, her smile effortless. There was no fear in her eyes. Vincent didn't say a word. The change had already begun. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Moments of Quiet Truth, where every story is a journey to rediscover what really matters: respect, courage, and the quiet strength of people who choose to care. Because real change doesn't start with policy. It starts with people who are willing to listen.